Release the weight, a Zen story to stop clenching your jaw. Right now, there is a rigid, tight constriction, wrapping completely around the muscles of your lower jaw, the delicate hinges of your jawbone, and the flat planes of your temples. It is the specific physical weight of a hidden internal exhaustion, the exhausting somatic tax of maintaining an absolute, unblemished appearance of emotional stability, strength, and total competence while your inner world is quietly buckling under the strain. You have spent your daylight hours holding your teeth together, locking away your natural vulnerability, and presenting a flawless facade to the world so that no one can witness the cracks forming in your foundation. Your face carries the deep fatigue of this performance, holding a tense, unyielding guard that refuses to drop even when the doors are closed and the lights are out. The immediate environment of your dark room is settling into the late night hours, offering a configuration of details designed to absorb the weight of your pretense. Outside, a gentle, cool wind carries the faint, chalky scent of distant limestone dust and the earthy dampness of wild ferns growing in deep stone hollows. Inside, the soft amber glow of a salt lamp on the floorboards casts long, heavy shadows across the grain of a dark cedar wardrobe, while the low, rhythmic ticking of a heavy brass pendulum clock on the wall provides a steady, unhurried anchor for the ears. The crisp, clean fabric of the mattress cover beneath your head begins to catch the warmth of your tired skin, inviting the stubborn tension in your jawline to loosen its protective grip. If it feels right, take a slow breath, letting your head sink fully into the surface beneath you, allowing the heavy armor of your public self to slide away into the shadows. You are not broken. What you are feeling in the tight clenching of your jaw and the heat behind your temples is not failure, nor is it a sign that you are weak because the facade has become too heavy to carry alone. The deep exhaustion you hold tonight is a vital message from your true nature, a clear sign that your spirit is ready to stop spending its life force defending a monument that was never real to begin with. Tonight, we will not force the mind to be silent, and we will not demand that you immediately erase the habits of perfectionism that have protected you for so long. You do not have to solve your whole life tonight, dear friend, and you do not need to secure the flawless front before you are permitted to let your body stop performing. Right now, nothing is required of you. There is a striking paradox at the heart of the Zen tradition that speaks directly to the specific exhaustion you are holding. We often believe that our peace depends entirely on our ability to build a perfectly solid, unshakable persona, an unblemished pillar of strength that remains completely untouched by the storms of difficulty. Yet, the profound insight of Buddhist wisdom reveals that the very act of defending this artificial monument is the primary source of our deepest spiritual confinement. We labor to polish the exterior, rubbing away every natural imperfection, believing that if we show even a single dark vein of vulnerability, our entire structure will collapse. But this is the illusion of the facade. Trying to find peace through forced perfection is like a master builder spending all his nights meticulously oiling a white limestone pillar just to hide the dark, natural slate running through its center. The pillar looks immaculate from a distance, yet the builder's hands are permanently raw from the friction, trapped in a constant battle against the true nature of the stone. Perhaps you have felt this too, the sudden, suffocating realization at midnight that the perfect front which once protected you from judgment has now become the very cage that prevents you from breathing. The mind turns inward, transforming your natural fatigue into an instrument of intense self-criticism, whispering that if you let your guard down for even a single hour, you will be exposed as inadequate or unready. This is the mechanism that adds a second wound to the original fatigue of your day. The first pain is simply the reality of living a human life with natural limits, complex emotions, and times of deep tiredness. The second pain is the cruel commentary you strike against your own temples, declaring that you must never show a flaw simply because you are expected to be strong. But the polished oil on the stone does not dictate the structural depth of the pillar. The flawless persona you display is merely a thin layer of dust, completely unable to diminish the vast, unconditioned space of the awareness that is watching it tonight. In a few moments, our attention will journey toward a windswept cliffside pavilion overlooking a misty chasm. where a senior temple keeper sat staring at a heavy linen cloth saturated with stone oil, feeling the exact same structural exhaustion that is tightening across your jaw right now. But before we enter that quiet workspace, allow your awareness to notice the physical weight of your head and face. Let the joints of your jaw drop open slightly. Let the teeth part, and let the skin across your forehead go completely smooth and heavy. You are safe enough to soften right now. The world will manage its own balance without your perfect performance for the next few hours. And every forced smile, every hidden worry, and every expectation of excellence can remain suspended in the dark. We spend so much of our vital energy treating our presence as an object that must be constantly polished for the approval of others, believing that if we reveal our internal weight, our connections will disintegrate. We evaluate our worth by how well we can hide our human textures, and then we wonder why our jaw joints feel so locked and hot when the day ends. But the raw limestone wall in the deep quarry does not feel a shred of shame for its gray veins. And the uncarved rock does not apologize to the forest for remaining rough beneath the moss. The suffering you experience does not come from the simple fact that you are tired or overwhelmed. It grows from the current resistance that refuses to let the facade crack, without demanding that your true nature be hidden away out of sight. Let another breath arrive naturally, without you needing to direct its depth or measure its cadence. Let it fill the spaces behind your cheeks, down through the root of your tongue, and out across the tips of your shoulders. You are nothing more than a living form resting in a dark room, completely free from the timelines, standards, and metrics of the waking world. In the deep silence that is growing between us, the cool evening air is moving through the cedar boards outside, requiring no flawless fronts and demanding no performance before it settles over the quiet earth. Let your awareness sink into the simple, cool texture of the cloth against your skin as we prepare to step onto the stone floor of the cliffside pavilion, where the keeper is waiting to show us how to let the cloth fall from our hands. High upon a windswept cliffside terrace where the air was perpetually thin and sharp, a grand white stone pavilion stood as the crown jewel of the mountain temple. The atmosphere within this open structure always smelled faintly of the thick, fatty sheep's oil used to preserve the masonry, mixed with the chalky, drying taste of airborne limestone dust carried by the updrafts from the chasm below. In this isolated sanctuary lived Haru, a senior monk who had been charged for 15 winters with the absolute preservation of the temple's external appearance. Haru moved through the terraced courtyards with a rigid, intensely disciplined posture, the muscles of his lower jaw permanently locked, his teeth worn smooth from an unconscious, nocturnal clenching that sent a dull, throbbing heat straight up into his temples. For many seasons, his inner life had been consumed by a private, crushing exhaustion, driven by the absolute requirement that he present a front of unshakable spiritual mastery to the hundreds of visiting pilgrims who climbed the peak each spring. During the great autumn gales, the temple had faced severe structural shifts, and several younger monks had turned to Haru for absolute emotional reassurance, looking to him as a pillar who felt no fear, no doubt, and no internal fatigue. He had accepted the role without a single murmur, clamping his jaw shut against his own natural panic, forcing his face into an expression of serene, unblemished confidence while his own spirit felt completely fractured by the immense weight of the responsibility. Day after day, he walked the perimeter of the shrines, offering perfectly measured words of wisdom, while his nights were spent in a state of hypervigilant isolation, his muscles aching from the quiet agony of maintaining a flawless exterior that left no room for his human heart to breathe. He felt he was nothing more than a painted statue, terrified that a single honest tear or a moment of visible exhaustion would expose him as an empty fraud to the monastery. The keeper of this high cliffside terrace was Master Jiku, an elderly temple custodian whose hands were permanently gray and smooth from decades of working with stone oil, and whose presence carried the quiet, heavy stillness of the mountain foundations. Jiku never offered public sermons on the nature of the self, spending his hours tracking the microfractures in the boundary walls or slowly applying preservative fats to the white surfaces to prevent the frost from biting the grain. He knew the exact velocity of Haru's internal decay, hearing the tight, clicked friction of the young monk's jaw every time they met at the dawning bells, observing how the senior disciple stood so rigidly against the wind that his entire frame seemed to vibrate with an unspent defensive force. On an afternoon when the mist had risen so thick from the chasm that it turned the pavilion into a floating room of pale, featureless gray, Jiku invited Haru to sit across from him on the unpolished stone floorboards. Between them lay a heavy linen polishing cloth, stiff and blackened in the center from being saturated with white limestone dust and thick sheep's oil over countless days of intense labor. The cloth was thick, heavy with the residue of its task, emitting a pungent, earthy odor that filled the damp air between the two men. Haru sat with his spine perfectly straight, his jaw locked in its habitual defensive knot, his eyes tracking the old custodian's movements with a disciplined focus. He assumed the master was about to demand that they begin the seasonal polishing of the main southern pillar, his mind already bracing itself to perform the physical labor without showing a single sign of the deep fatigue that was numbing his arms. Master Jiku did not stand up, and he did not point toward the massive pillars. Instead, he reached down, picked up the saturated linen cloth, and placed it directly into Haru's open palms, asking the senior monk to hold its weight and describe the true nature of the texture he was carrying. Haru gripped the stiff linen, his fingers wrapping tightly around the oily fibers, his voice strained and tight with an unspent burning heat as he replied that the cloth felt incredibly heavy, rigid, and choked by the very dust it was meant to clear away. He stated that the material had become so clogged with the residue of the white limestone that it could no longer absorb anything new, its natural softness entirely lost beneath a hardened, artificial crust of white powder and grease. He confessed, with a sudden trembling drop in his voice, that his own heart felt exactly like that saturated cloth, so completely choked by the effort to maintain an unblemished white front for the monastery, that his actual life had become stiff, grease-stained, and completely incapable of experiencing a single moment of genuine warmth or rest. The old custodian reached out and gently tapped the center of the stiff linen with his rough index finger. He told the monk that the cloth had become useless for polishing, precisely because it refused to let go of the white dust it had gathered, accumulating layer after layer of the immaculate facade until its original, flexible nature was entirely buried beneath the crust. Jiku pointed out that the cloth was not a stone pillar. Its true purpose was to be soft, to absorb, and to change with the work, not to turn itself into a rigid monument out of a fear of its own natural fibers. The intense agony Haru carried did not come from the vulnerability running through his spirit. It grew entirely from his own exhausting habit of keeping the cloth clenched tightly in his fists, forcing his face to remain as white and unblemished as the limestone, while his true substance was suffocating beneath the grease. Haru sat perfectly still in the floating mist, the thick scent of the sheep's oil settling deep into his chest as his fingers slowly uncurled, letting the stiff linen drop flat onto the gray stone floor between them. For the first time in 15 winters, the rigid hot constriction wrapping around his jaw joints began to give way, allowing his teeth to part and a long, shuddering breath to expand the very bottom of his lungs. He looked at his own open, empty palms resting on his knees, recognizing that the immaculate persona he had built for the pilgrims was merely a layer of accumulated dust on the surface of his life, completely unable to alter the deep, unconditioned space of the human heart that was finally permitted to drop its guard. Slowly, the quiet, heavy stillness of that cliffside pavilion moves into the immediate boundaries of your own dark room tonight, letting the image of the saturated linen cloth mirror the exact condition of your own exhausted spirit. You have been lying awake, holding the cloth tightly in your fists, forcing your jaw to remain locked against your own fatigue, and letting the fear of showing a single dark vein of vulnerability dictate the boundary of your evening rest. You have believed that until the front is made perfectly secure by an act of absolute will, your entire body must remain in a state of active, rigid defense. But the uncarved stone of your being is already holding its space with absolute security, completely untouched by the expectations of the world outside. Let the cloth fall from your hands in the dark, allowing your awareness to settle into the wide, unpolished depth of this single hour. This reflection on the stiff, oil-saturated linen cloth is not telling us to stop feeling our human vulnerability, nor is it asking us to become cold, unyielding statues who remain completely numb when the demands of life threaten to split our foundations. It is not a demand to cultivate a state of forced indifference where we pretend that carrying the heavy weight of everyone else's expectations does not leave a genuine, deep exhaustion behind our temples. Instead, it is revealing an internal movement that is much quieter, a gentle shift in perspective that allows us to recognize the buildup of our protective layer without allowing that crust to harden into a permanent prison for our present vitality. The persistent, tight clenching that sits directly within your jaw joints tonight does not survive simply because you had to be strong during the daylight hours. The deepest suffering takes root when the mind insists on holding that flawless facade as the absolute, defining truth of your entire being. When we view this Latinite restlessness through the clear, simple lens of Buddhist insight, we see that what we often describe as attachment is actually that stubborn defensive knot in the face that insists, until I am completely certain that no one can see my hidden exhaustion, my entire body must remain in a state of active, rigid performance. It is the exhausting habit of locking our fundamental peace into the perception of others, desperately trying to project an unshakable front to satisfy a world that may never look close enough to see the strain. We treat our sense of emotional stability as if it were a white limestone pillar that must never show a natural vein of gray slate. And when a crack of fatigue appears, we believe our actual substance has been ruined. This is the modern reality of craving. It is the frantic Latinite driving that keeps us mentally replaying every social interaction or projecting future expectations, hoping that one more round of absolute self-control will somehow secure the front and keep us safe from rejection. But a polished pillar up on the high terrace cannot yield up your freedom, no matter how many times you inspect the surface for blemishes against the dark ceiling. The public roles have already been played. The forced smiles have already been given. The limestone dust has already settled. When we lie awake burning our vital energy to maintain these unchangeable masks, we are participating in a quiet internal process that adds a second wound to the first. The first wound is simply the raw, unavoidable friction of living a human life with natural limits, the sudden arrival of deep fatigue, the weight of responsibilities we didn't ask for, the natural vulnerability of wanting to be seen as capable. These experiences are genuinely heavy, but they belong to the basic, unpreventable weather of human existence. The second wound, however, is the one we strike against our own temples when our thoughts turn inward and declare, because you are feeling tired and overwhelmed, you are permanently inadequate, weak, and unready. Let this quiet realization sit directly next to the tight, hot constriction wrapping around your jaw joints right now. Consider what happens when we replace that desperate desire for absolute emotional perfection with simple, spacious awareness. This quality of mind is not an academic exercise or a complex discipline that you must execute flawlessly before your eyes can close. It is simply the capacity to look directly at the heavy crust of your persona, without allowing it to dictate the breadth of your current breath. It is the ability to observe the rigid agitation in your face, to label it gently as the old habit of self-protection, and to recognize that the white dust belongs entirely to the surface of the cloth, not to the wide, flexible space of the heart beneath it. When you allow the linen to drop flat onto the floor, without continuously rubbing your fingers against the grease, you stop feeding the friction that keeps your muscles raw. You let the facade exist in the past while you remain unpolished in the present room. Impermanence, when translated into the immediate texture of your evening rest, becomes an immense sanctuary for an exhausted heart. It acts as a gentle reminder that the perfect front you displayed during the day is not a solid, unchanging monument trapped inside your skeleton. That impeccable persona is a temporary pattern that belonged to the public arena. It has no physical substance, no structural weight, and no ability to touch the living form resting against your cotton sheets tonight. The face lying in this room is entirely separate from those old expectations. Its jaw joints capable of opening to a clean, ancient rhythm that has never been restricted by the standards of a monastery. You do not have to force your current muscles to maintain a defensive guard, just to preserve an image that lives only in the memories of others. True letting go does not mean you abandon your dedication, or that you pretend the internal weight did not feel heavy. It means you stop using the appearance of absolute strength as a metric to determine whether you are permitted to take a full, unhurried breath in the dark. It means you acknowledge the stiff, oil-stained layers of your protective front. Look at the linen with a soft, non-judgmental eye, and then allow the cloth to rest in the shade, without demanding that your spirit become flawless before you are allowed to sleep. When you drop the expectation that you must always be an unblemished pillar for everyone around you, you discover that true compassion is the willingness to stand in your own empty center and hold your vulnerable temples with a tenderness that requires no external validation. In a moment, this path will lead us into a soft, internal practice where we can begin to experience this spaciousness within our own skin, using the rhythm of our own presence. But right now, notice how effortlessly your body is managing its own survival in the amber shadows, completely unconcerned with the flawless performance you tried to maintain during the daylight hours. Your pulse does not check the state of your public identity before it agrees to warm your limbs, and your lungs do not demand an unblemished record from the peak before they open to receive the cool night breeze. You are already being sustained by a deep, natural intelligence that operates entirely outside the boundaries of human perfectionism, resting securely within a night that requires no transactional fronts before it offers you its peace. If it feels right, let your attention gather very gently right along the lower features of your face, arriving at the exact physical boundaries where that rigid, tight constriction has been anchoring its energy. There is no need to actively push the heavy pretense away, and there is no requirement to make your mind completely quiet by force. Simply notice the physical texture of the tightness, observing the stubborn pressure in your jawbone joints and your temples, as if you were merely looking at a heavy, stiff linen cloth resting on a cliffside stone floor, without any urgency to strip away the thick layer of white dust built up across its fibers. As you rest here in the deep, amber-shadowed stillness of the late night hour, perhaps you can invite a slow wave of softening to move through the deep muscles of your face and throat. Let the small, rigid fibers surrounding your jawline loosen their protective grip, allowing the teeth to part slightly, and let your temples feel wide, as if they were dissolving naturally into the cool, unpolished space beneath your head. There is no pressure to achieve a sudden state of profound emotional healing in this moment, and even just noticing that your facial muscles still feel tight, guarded, or hot is entirely enough. You are simply taking stock of your own internal landscape, acknowledging where the mind has been buckle-strapping its armor against the vast uncertainty of public judgment. Right now, let the specific memory of that forced, impeccable performance float up into your awareness, perhaps the exact interaction where you smiled through a deep internal heaviness, the exhaustion of carrying everyone else's expectations, or the general, heavy worry that you will be completely cast aside if anyone sees the structural flaws in your foundation. Do not try to analyze the validity of the expectation, and do not try to fix the perception of the people you have been supporting. Instead, just name the emotional pattern that is currently tightening across your forehead and jaw. You might say to yourself very quietly, "This is the habit of polishing the white facade," or "This is the old defensive heat trying to hide the dark slate vein." Just by naming it, you are stepping out of the dark, urgent internal courtroom and standing beside Master Jiku in the floating mist, looking at the stiff linen cloth from a place of unhurried safety. Imagine that your public persona is like that heavy linen cloth, saturated with sheep's oil and limestone dust, its natural texture having become stiff and encrusted from decades of continuous polishing. Look at its rigid shape in your mind's eye. See how many times your thoughts have gripped that stiff material today, fixing your sight entirely upon the immaculate front, letting that hardened crust convince you that your true nature has been permanently buried. In this quiet space, if it feels comfortable, imagine taking that heavy, burning need to appear unshakable, that persistent wish to hide your natural fatigue, and allowing it to rest quietly inside the stiff, oil-stained layers of the cloth. You do not have to wash the linen with your exhaustion, and you do not have to make the surface clean. You are simply setting the cloth down on the gray stone floor while you step back into your own breathing body. Watch what happens to the internal space across your face as you let the persona sit outside of your identity. Perhaps the image of the stiff cloth begins to change its texture under the steady, cool sweep of the night air. The faint, chalky scent of distant limestone dust rises from the chasm, filling the room with a clean, grounded quality that has nothing to do with the forced smiles. The stone pavilion does not collapse, and the foundations remain completely solid beneath your weight, holding their space with absolute security. The crust on the cloth does not diminish the capacity of the mountain to support the timber. Shrines, it is simply a layer of dust on the stone floor, entirely separate from the deep, untouched substance of the canyon below. If your thoughts begin to drift back toward the pilgrims, the expectations of the monastery, or the sentences you wish you could speak to prove your absolute strength, you can return to the simple, rhythmic expansion of your lower lungs whenever you are ready. There is no failure in a mind that wanders back to its masks. The cool wind through the cedar boards does not apologize for moving in the dark, and your memories are no different from that natural occurrence. They are simply configurations resting in your vast, unmeasured hall of awareness, and they cannot permanently break your true self unless you choose to believe that you are the crust on the cloth. Nothing needs to be forced tonight, dear friend. You are not required to empty your heart of its exhaustion through an act of sheer will, and you do not have to guarantee that your face will feel entirely light before the morning light arrives. You are simply a living form, letting the heavy, unalterable rolls of the day rest on the floorboards, while the unmoving dark continues to cradle your temples, leaving your inner center wide, unpolished, and deeply at peace. Far below the windswept terraces, nestled in a deep, shadowed indentation of the mountain where the sun only reached the earth for an hour at midday, lay a quiet limestone quarry shaded by massive wild ferns. The air in this sunken clearing always carried the cool, damp scent of wet moss, the mineral tang of split rock, and the steady, metallic ring of iron tools hitting raw stone. In this isolated workspace lived Kisa, a young stonemason whose hands were permanently rough from the chisel, but whose spirit carried that same rigid, exhausting constriction, wrapping completely around the joints of his jaw and his temples. For 3 seasons, Kisa had been laboring over a massive structural pillar intended for the central hall of the Valley Monastery. His instructions were to produce an absolute, unblemished column of pure white limestone. But midway through his work, a deep, dark natural vein of gray slate had revealed itself, running straight through the core of the stone. Instead of presenting the stone honestly to the builders, Kisa had been consumed by an intense defensive panic, terrified that the visible flaw would expose him as an incompetent craftsman who could not choose a perfect block. He spent his nights in the dark shed, using an abrasive stone sander to furiously rub the surface, desperately trying to create a paste of white limestone dust to fill and camouflage the dark slate line. He worked until his arms were completely numb, his teeth ground together so tightly that a sharp, throbbing heat radiated across his brow. The harder he tried to eliminate the natural configuration of the rock, the more the friction wore away at his physical strength, culminating on a damp morning when his limbs simply buckled from absolute exhaustion, leaving him slumped against the half-polished column, his eyes burning with tears of frustration and shame. The supervisor of this deep quarry clearing was Mother Ashin, an old nun who had spent 40 winters cutting foundation blocks by hand, her face lined like the rock faces themselves, her presence as unhurried and steady as the mountain mass. Ashin never offered lengthy discourses on the nature of perfection, spending her hours tracking the natural cleavages of the stone, or guiding the younger apprentices in how to strike the metal wedges with a balanced, relaxed shoulder. She had been observing Kaisa's frantic night labor, recognizing the mechanical, desperate rhythm of his sander and the tight, clicked lock of his jaw whenever he tried to hide the column from her view. On the afternoon of his collapse, when the valley fog had settled low into the fern beds, turning the quarry into a silent room of damp stone and shadow. Ocean walked over to Kaiser's workbench. She did not scold him for his lack of progress, and she did not offer empty praise to soothe his wounded pride. Instead, she reached into her hemp tool bag, pulled out a heavy, iron-tipped stone-splitting wedge, a tool blunted and scarred from years of hard impact, and drove it halfway into a small fissure just an inch away from the dark slate vein running through the boulder. Kisa sat with his shoulders hunched tightly, his lower jaw clenched in its familiar, painful knot, his breath coming in shallow, defensive hitches as he watched the old nun pick up a heavy wooden mallet. He assumed she was about to split the pillar in two, destroying months of his labor to punish him for the hidden flaw, his mind racing to construct a desperate excuse to save his reputation. Mother Ashin did not swing the mallet with fury. Instead, she handed the wooden handle to the young mason, stepped back against the raw limestone wall, and told him to strike the iron wedge just once, instructing him to listen completely to the resonance of the impact rather than focusing on the appearance of the surface. Kisa hesitated, his fingers wrapping around the cold, wet wood of the mallet, his voice tight and hoarse with an unspent bitter heat as he stated that the pillar was already ruined. He argued that the dark vein made the column untrustworthy, that the flaw was an absolute failure of his technique, and that trying to split or shape it further was useless while the inner blemish remained visible. He confessed, his jaw tight against the weight of his admission, that his own heart felt exactly like that compromised stone, split internally by a deep, dark weight of inadequacy that he could never sand away. Forced to perform the role of a master builder while knowing his core was fundamentally defective. The old nun stood perfectly still among the green ferns, her gray robes brushed by the mist. She placed her rough hand over Kaiser's locked knuckles, looked down at the driven iron wedge, and advised him to stop treating the dark slate line as an enemy that had to be destroyed before the stone could be trusted. She pointed out that the gray vein was not a hollow space or a pocket of rot. It was the ancient, solid slate of the mountain foundation itself, completely interwoven with the white limestone, providing the exact same density and structural strength as the rest of the rock. Ocean explained that the pillar did not need to be perfectly white to hold the roof of the monastery. Its true integrity lived in its raw, unbroken wholeness, entirely indifferent to the color of the pattern on its skin. Kisa stood transfixed in the cool dampness of the quarry, the mineral smell of the split rock filling his lungs as he looked at the iron-tipped wedge driven deep into the stone. In that quiet moment, he chose a subtle, profound act of discipline. He did not strike the wedge in anger, and he did not pick up the sander to cover the line. He simply closed his eyes, took one long, slow breath before his thoughts could declare the stone a failure, and allowed the reality of the imperfect pillar to exist without his resistance. He stopped the habit of treating his self-critical thoughts as absolute truth, accepting that the stone was vast enough to hold both a dark slate vein and a beautiful structure. He laid the mallet down on the bench, ran his rough palm gently over the unpolished gray line, and let the desperate need to appear flawless dissolve into the quiet depths of the quarry. This was the transformation, one small shift from fighting the natural texture of his reality to resting in the raw, uncarved space of what was already solid. As he walked back toward the tool shed, the tight, hot constriction wrapping around his jaw joints began to cool, letting his awareness expand past the narrow front of his pretense. He realized that the column was strong precisely because it was whole, and that his own capacity to stand steady remained completely untouched by the natural imperfections of his history, like the iron-tipped wedge resting securely within a stone that did not need to be white to carry its immense load. When we allow our attention to settle into the quiet spaces of our own lat-night reflections, we begin to decode the hidden emotional engine that converts the natural fatigue of life into an ongoing sentence of internal friction. We often assume that our physical exhaustion is a direct consequence of the visible tasks we performed, or the actual hours we spent managing our outward responsibilities. But if you observe the tight, hot constriction currently wrapping completely around the joints of your lower jaw and the flat planes of your temples, you will find that the real consumer of your vitality is the continuous, hidden act of resistance. It is the energetic strain of refusing to let the natural slate vein show through the white limestone. The desperate attempt to manipulate the perception of others through the application of your own suffering. We treat our minds as an active laboratory of defense, continuously polishing the surface of our persona with the memory of every perceived shortcoming, operating under the tragic delusion that if we keep our skin raw and alert, we will somehow secure our sanctuary against the uncertainty of the world. This is the exact point where we can begin to separate the original weight of existence from the elaborate psychological armor the mind builds on top of it. Buddhist wisdom approaches this dilemma with a beautiful direct distinction between the first pain and the second pain. The first pain is simply the raw, unpolished impact of being alive in a world constructed out of unpredictable currents and natural human limitations. It is the sudden arrival of deep emotional fatigue. It is the natural vulnerability of carrying a heavy workload. It is the simple reality of being a human being who feels doubt, fear, or sadness in the face of change. These occurrences are genuinely heavy, yes, but they belong to the basic, unpreventable weather of our daily reality. We cannot control the arrival of the first pain, for the dark vein does not ask the permission of the stonemason before it reveals its long path through the core of the mountain boulder. The true torment begins when our thoughts take that first pain and knead it into a permanent moral identity, actively constructing the second pain out of our own resistance. The second pain is the elaborate mental trial we host right along our facial muscles and temples, where we translate a temporary pattern of human fatigue into a definitive commentary on our absolute value. We do not simply notice that we are feeling overwhelmed or tired. The mind turns inward and whispers, "Because you are struggling to hold this together, you are fundamentally inadequate, fraudulent, and banned from true peace." We do not just navigate an intense period of responsibility, our thoughts declare. This internal fracture is proof that your core is inherently defective. This is the mechanism of turning temporary pain into a solid identity, the unfortunate habit of mistaking a natural, structural vein of slate for an absolute pocket of rot that must be covered up with white dust. When we exist within this pattern of self-judgment, our awareness spends its late-night hours rehearsing the future and replaying the past, frantically attempting to build a wall of hypervigilance against the terrifying landscape of human vulnerability. We stay awake repeating every word we spoke during the day, because we believe that our burning regret is a form of protection, that if we keep the inner dialogue sharp and critical, we will somehow force ourselves to be perfectly unshakable tomorrow. We develop an insatiable need for internal approval, trying to fix the self through a subtle application of shame, using our self-punishment as a temporary payment to satisfy the internal prosecutor we carry in our skin. But trying to heal your exhausted spirit through the accumulation of mental friction is like trying to preserve a limestone pillar by covering the raw rock with thick sheep's grease. The crust remains trapped on the surface, waiting to restrict your natural breathing the moment the light fades. True inner transformation does not manifest because you have finally forced every single flaw to disappear from your character through sheer willpower. It begins with the radical, quiet realization that peace is not the absence of difficulty. It is an entirely different relationship with the difficulty itself. It is the willingness to stand in the deep quarry clearing without immediately picking up the sander to hit your own temples. When you allow the reality of the dark slate vein to exist without transforming it into an absolute verdict on your soul, you are stopping the second pain before it can plant its roots in your body. You are choosing to sit quietly among the green ferns in the dark, letting the rock be rock, and letting the inner space be vast, without needing to apologize to the universe for the color of the pattern running through your foundation. As you let the pillow support the heavy framework of your head right now, notice how the desperate urge to appear perfectly unblemished begins to lose its grip when it is met with simple, non-judgmental presence. You do not have to settle the record of your entire social standing before the night ends, and you do not need to guarantee that your emotional reserve will be fully restored by tomorrow morning. The path toward inner freedom does not ask you to become a magically perfect statue who never experiences the sting of doubt or fatigue. It simply requires the very small, very steady discipline of noticing the tight loop along your jaw, naming it as the old defensive pretense, and refusing to give its declarations the authority of truth. You are the vast, open quarry that holds both the raw limestone wall and the quiet ferns. You are not the white dust that is currently blowing away in the dark. In a moment, this gentle insight will move even closer to the small, ordinary triggers of your modern life, showing us how to carry this soft hand into the waking world without guilt. But for now, let your attention sink down into the quiet, unmoving center of your temples. Let your lower jaw expand outward on its own natural rhythm, taking up all the space it requires in the amber shadows, completely free from the narrow metrics of outward performance. You are safe enough to drop the protective armor right here, leaving your spirit as unblemished, wide, and supportive as the heavy stone boulder before the first iron wedge was ever driven across its surface. Now let this quiet understanding step softly across the centuries, moving out of the deep quarry clearings and directly into the small electric friction of your ordinary evening. The stiff, oil-saturated polishing cloth and the iron-tipped masonry wedge we have been exploring are not abstract concepts designed to live only within an old temple archive. They are the exact configurations of energy you hold down in your jaw joints and temples when you lie awake at midnight, staring at the blank screen of your phone, waiting for a text message that might validate your value or offer a temporary reassurance that you have not driven away the people you care about. We live so much of our modern lives inside this digital hypervigilance, repeatedly checking our devices for an external metric of our strength, replaying a minor social mistake or a perceived delay in our life path, as if the sheer force of our anxiety could somehow rewrite the reality of our day. We perform the role of the unshakable anchor during the daylight hours, smiling warmly while feeling an immense heavy thickness inside our chest, carrying the constant worry that we are fundamentally falling behind our peers, or that our true, unpolished self is simply not enough to sustain our connections. You can begin to transform this exhausting mechanism right in the middle of the very moments that cause your breathing to shallow, recognizing that peace is not an allure-nothing victory, but a quality practiced in the smallest, most unexceptional slivers of the day. When you find yourself caught in the frantic urge to control a relationship, check your notifications for validation, or fear the absolute uncertainty of the future, you are fully permitted to pause. A single, slow breath taken before you offer an answer or look at your screen is a profound form of wisdom. It is a quiet, somatic realization that not every self-critical thought deserves your immediate obedience, and not every heavy feeling is an absolute command that must be followed into a late-night internal courtroom. You are simply stepping out into the wide room of your own presence, letting the chalky residue of your daily tasks pass over your mind without allowing it to compromise the permanent, load-bearing foundation of your true stone core. Perhaps you have spent years operating under the hidden law that your right to rest must be bought with a continuous display of flawless emotional stability, and that wanting to let your eyes close while your inner difficulties remain unresolved is a form of guilt-ridden failure. We treat our rest as a luxury that must be earned through absolute competence, fearing that if we stop polishing the front or analyzing our vulnerability, we will be left completely exposed in the dark. But the scarred iron wedge does not feel a shred of remorse for sitting empty on the timber bench, and the raw limestone wall does not apologize to the forest for letting its fractures exist under the moss. You can rest without earning it first. Your exhaustion is not a moral debt that must be settled through hours of overthinking. It is simply the natural voice of an internal posture that has run out of vital energy from trying to carry the weight of an immaculate front. It is entirely possible to care deeply about the work you produce, the people you support, and the growth you desire without gripping their outcomes so fiercely that you crush your own jaw joints on the defensive armor. When we attempt to control the future or hide our natural fatigue through the continuous application of our own shame, we are acting like Kisa before his sander was laid down, refusing to let the reality of the dark slate vein exist as a natural configuration of a vast mountain boulder. True inner freedom begins when you allow your living biography to be offered to the world with a loose, receptive hand. You can maintain your daily responsibilities, contemplate your growth, or rest your body with the simple, unforced presence of damp fern fronds in the quarry, letting the surface pattern exist without demanding that it match a standard of absolute white certainty. The next time the creeping heat of perfectionism settles deep into your facial muscles, when you find yourself comparing your hidden, tired routine to the manufactured triumphs of those around you, look down at the quiet weight of your own posture and take a slow breath. The doubt you hid or the tear you refused to cry is merely the external weather of a long, unpredictable human existence. You do not have to pretend the internal weight did not feel heavy, and you do not have to force an immediate state of complete transformation before the raw edge of your exhaustion has even cooled. It is completely enough to sit with the uncertainty of your own unfinished healing, letting the irregular fragments of your day rest on the floorboards without needing to stamp them with the label of permanent failure. In a few moments, the remaining definitions and standards of the daylight hours will dissolve entirely into the dark, leaving nothing but the vast protective space of this midnight room. As your limbs prepare to surrender their final defensive postures, release the illusion that you must secure every single boundary of your public identity before you are permitted to let your temples relax. The expectations of the day carry no authority in this quiet sanctuary, and the unresolved masks can remain suspended in the cool mist outside your window. Let your attention drop back down into the steady, unhurried rise and fall of your lower lungs, knowing that the load-bearing substance of your true nature is already fully intact, completely wide, and entirely at peace. The dark hour has fully arrived now, and the quiet gravity of the night is settling over your bed like the thick, unmoving fog that holds the deep quarry clearing in absolute stillness. Every single effort you made today, every flawless front you maintained beneath your jawline, and every anxious reach for reassurance has dropped its momentum, dissolving into the silence of this amber-shadowed room. The heavy, unalterable expectations of the mountain peak are no longer pulling at your temples. They have slid away, falling through the floorboards into the quiet earth, leaving your internal space completely empty, spacious, and cool. Your facial muscles and your brow are sinking a fraction of an inch deeper into the surface beneath you, as if the heavy wood of your inner nature were finally remembering its relationship with the steady, uncarved foundation of the stone. Let your breathing become very small, very quiet, and entirely effortless. There is absolutely no need to regulate the air as it moves down through your throat. The lungs know how to expand and soften on their own time, like the slow, steady movement of the valley wind passing directly through the empty fronds of the wild ferns. With every long, unhurried release of breath, the tight, defensive clenching that you held across your jaw joints is letting go of its grip. The discordant lines of your public performance are no longer being tracked or verified by an internal court case. The polishing cloths have been dropped onto the stone floorboards. The abrasive sanders are resting in the dark, and the high cliffside terraces have completely vanished beneath a blanket of silent, protective dark. You have permission to stop solving your life for tonight. The white facades, the hidden gray veins, and the strategies for tomorrow do not require your presence while the clearing is cold. They can remain suspended in the shadows outside your window, completely separate from the living form that is resting here in the quiet. You are under no obligation to repair your entire biography before your eyes are allowed to close. You are permitted to be unwritten, unpolished, and completely finished with the trial, resting within the safe sanctuary of an uncompromised night that asks for no perfect fronts before it offers you its blanket of rest. The teaching of the deep quarry clearing is settling deep into the marrow of your bones now, filling the heavy spaces across your face with an enveloping tenderness. You are returning home to the pristine silence that was always waiting beneath your desire to alter the natural grain of your youth, the vast, unmeasured awareness that cannot be broken because it belongs to the raw, uncarved stone of your own presence. Let the universe carry its own silent turning for the next few hours, while your spirit drifts further away from the language of flawless monument metrics and transactional approval. Your jaw is loose, your temples are heavy like damp limestone resting in the shade, and the cool, still rhythm of the evening is cradling your weary body as you prepare to slide away into a deep, peaceful, and dreamless sleep. What if the structural integrity of the column has always lived in the strength of the hidden gray slate, rather than the perfection of the white dust that covers it? The dark, cool mineral texture of the unpolished stone does not change its essence when the wind carries away the white powder from the courtyard, and the ground beneath the pavilion remains perfectly solid whether it supports a painted statue or an uncarved boulder. All the frantic, heavy weight that locked your jaw during the day, the exhausting effort to prove that you are completely unshakable, and the sharp regret over the moments where your internal fatigue threatened to show all of it is losing its hold under the immense cool dark of this late hour. The mind can finally lay down its heavy abrasive stones because the space you occupy tonight cannot be split by an honest admission of tiredness. Nor can your true depth be measured by the absolute whiteness of the column. You are simply here, a living presence breathing in the quiet, completely separate from the flawless fronts that were built for a yesterday you have already left behind. When we look directly into the wide, windless space of your own internal presence, we find that our true capacity for liberation is not an immaculate monument reached through absolute self-control. It is much more like the profound, load-bearing depth of the raw rock face that allows a dark slate line to run through its center, while the remaining mountain continues to hold its space with absolute stability. The pretense that felt so rigid and hot in your face tonight was never your core reality. It was merely a thin layer of dust gathered on the surface of your tasks. You do not need to wash away the natural configuration of your human vulnerability, and you do not need to force an artificial strength out of an exhausted frame. You only need to remain still, heavy, and entirely present, letting the facade rest on the floorboards until the restless friction runs completely out of air. Think of how much vital energy has been traded in the effort to maintain an unblemished appearance for the approval of others, to force an anxious mind to look perfectly serene before you permit your own muscles to find comfort. That constant holding, that perpetual readiness to defend your stability against the judgment of your own thoughts, is the very thing that has left your jaw joints feeling so locked and hot at the end of the day. But tonight, the high terraces are silent, and the quarry is still. The natural fatigue of your spirit is not a permanent failure of your discipline. It was simply a reaction to a changing world of immense pressures, completely powerless to diminish the deep, unconditioned nature of the awareness resting against your sheets tonight. You do not need to secure the front before you are allowed to rest, and you do not need to hide your true texture before your eyes are permitted to close. Let your attention sink down even further now, moving past the soft expansion of your chest and settling into the absolute immobility of your temples and jaw. Feel the profound, grounding weight of your head as it yields entirely to the support beneath you. Completely cradled by the quiet intelligence of the night, the mossy clearings have held the weight of the raw boulders and the damp fern fronds through thousands of winters without needing a single polished surface to justify their existence. And they are fully capable of holding your weary limbs tonight. You do not have to hold the weight of your performance anymore. Every forced smile, every hidden worry, and every expectation of excellence can remain exactly where it fell on the path outside, losing its structural power in the cooling night air. The breathing of your body is becoming so thin, so quiet, and so effortless that it feels like nothing more than a faint whisper of wind moving through a deep stone hollow after the sun has set below the mountain ridge. There is no longer any separation between the immense silence of the quarry clearing and the spaciousness that is expanding within your own skin. The thoughts that were replaying your past interactions a few hours ago have turned into pale, translucent shadows, dissolving into the deep, unmeasured pool of your awareness without leaving a single mark behind. You are returning to the ancient, untroubled home that existed long before the first mask was ever placed upon your face, the silent, unpolished space where you are already wide, already safe, and already deeply at peace. Let the final definitions of the day slip away entirely now, leaving your spirit as wide, raw, and unbothered as the vast limestone wall resting in the evening shade. There are no roles to perform, no facades to maintain, and no versions of your strength to defend. In this beautiful, protective dark, the universe will manage its own balance without your assistance, and the morning will bring its own light when the time is right. But right now, in this single pocket of pure presence, nothing is required of your mind but the simple willingness to drop the weight of the pretense and rest. Let your awareness dissolve completely into the heavy, rhythmic peace of your body, allowing your weary soul to slide effortlessly into a deep, peaceful, and dreamless sleep. The damp, fern-scented air of the deep clearing continues to move softly through the shadows, holding the stillness of the mountain without any urgency to polish the uncarved rock or cover the natural fractures that line the foundation stone. We accumulate a profound, silent exhaustion when we treat our own presence as an endless masonry task, continuously rubbing away at our natural human textures, as if our fundamental safety depended on maintaining a front that never shows the strain of the day. But the cool, mossy ground does not demand an unblemished surface before it agrees to stabilize the weight of the boulder. And the night does not require the pieces of your life to be perfectly aligned before it offers you its restorative quiet. You are fully permitted to step out of the exhausting habit of acting as the builder of your own monument tonight, leaving the unfinished blueprints of your performance on the workbench, completely done with the labor of hiding your raw humanity from a world that is already resting in the dark. When we look directly into the spacious, unmoving clearing right behind your closed eyelids, we can see that true inner freedom is not a state of flawless, rigid perfection that eliminates all human hesitation. It is simply the quiet willingness to sit on the damp earth beside the half-shaped column, allowing the dark slate vein to exist exactly as it is, without converting that natural configuration into an absolute proof of your structural inadequacy. The mind creates the second wound when it takes the simple reality of being tired or uncertain and turns it into a permanent identity, whispering that because you carry a deep internal fatigue, you are fundamentally weak and unready for peace. But the person who struggled to maintain the immaculate front during the daylight hours has already dissolved into the fluid current of the past. The living form resting against your bedding tonight is entirely new. It's breathing completely free from the old constraints, its awareness expanding into a night that requires no performance to justify its space. Let the lingering tension along your jawline and behind your temples open completely now, as if the rigid layers of pretense were merely white dust being carried away by a gentle evening breeze. You do not have to settle the complications of your social standing before your eyelids are permitted to grow heavy. And you do not have to guarantee that your inner world will feel perfectly ordered by the time the dawn breaks across the valley. The path toward an unshakable peace begins in these very small, unexceptional moments of the night when you notice the self-critical thought arising. Name it gently as the old habit of self-protection, and refuse to give its harsh commentary the authority of truth. You are the vast, open quarry that contains both the raw stone and the quiet ferns. You are not the white paste that is currently drying and cracking in the shade. Your muscles are remembering their natural weight, sinking effortlessly into the deep support beneath you as the desperate urge to fix your biography finally runs completely out of momentum. The heavy iron tools of your daily performance have been laid down in the grass. The long, difficult effort of trying to buy your security through an absolute appearance of strength is over, and the world asks nothing more of your presence for the next few hours. Every forced smile, every hidden worry, and every expectation of excellence can remain exactly where it fell on the path outside, losing its structural power in the growing dark. You are safe enough to drop the defensive armor right here, letting your breath become so thin, so quiet, and so unhurried that it feels like nothing more than a gentle ripple moving through a cool mountain pool that has completely run out of wind. The separation between the wide, unmoving stillness of the canyon floor and the spaciousness inside your own chest is fading away entirely now, leaving nothing but a clean, receptive vessel cradled by the dark. The thoughts that were replaying your daily interactions a few hours ago are losing their sharp definitions, melting away like evening smoke, dissolving over the distant ridges, until the stone face of your awareness is completely gray, blank, and untroubled by memory. You are home in the silent sanctuary of your own being, a clean and open form resting on the solid ground, entirely released from the requirement to produce a melody or justify your existence through a display of perfect symmetry. Let your mind dissolve completely into the heavy, rhythmic peace of your body, allowing your weary soul to slide effortlessly into a deep, peaceful, and dreamless sleep.